Tomorrow morning, President Trump meets face-to-face for the first time with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Joining me now is Nicholas Kristof, columnist for the New York Times, and Robin Wright, the joint fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace and the Woodrow Wilson Center. Good evening to both of you. Nick, you first. Your reaction to CNN's new reporting tonight that the Russians have escalated their spying efforts since the election. What do you think?
Well, it makes it, I think, all the more important on that President Trump raised this issue in his meeting with President Putin. And it was certainly important already, I think, to raise the issue of interference in the election. But to the extent that we're talking about something going forward into 2018, it becomes all the more important. And, you know, we just don't know, as some of your guests were saying, which Trump is going to show up at that meeting.
Yeah. CNN's reporting is that the current and former U.S. intelligence officials have told CNN that U.S. adversaries feel emboldened by the lack of retaliatory response from both the Obama and Trump administrations going into the meeting tomorrow with Putin. Do you think that this reporting is going to put more pressure on President Trump?
I think it's probably going to put pressure on him to be seen to have said something to Vladimir Putin. But you have to remember, this is a half-hour meeting. There's not going to be a lot of time to do very much between a photo op, shaking hands, and the translations. We're talking about, you know, maybe 20 minutes. They have several major subjects to discuss: the Ukraine, Syria, ISIS, and of course, most of all, North Korea. The United States is looking for something to come out of this. This is the biggest meeting of the president's young presidency, and there's been an enormous focus on his relationship with Putin, whether he's met him before or not, and that he has to produce something out of this to look like he is the strong man capable of taking on one of the shrewdest Russian leaders of, you know, the last many decades. This is going to be a real challenge, I think, for President Trump and his Secretary of State, both who are ingenues, they're novices on foreign policy, to look like they have, that they're strong and they've come out of this and they have come to some kind of agreement on anything with the Russians.
You used the word shrewd, and I thought it's important because Vladimir Putin he'll bring a dog or whatever it is to a meeting. He studies world leaders to see what their weaknesses are. And then earlier today, during his press conference in Poland, the president said he thinks Russia was involved in meddling in the election, but he also thinks that it was, quote, and this is a quote from him, probably other people and or countries. So on the eve of this meeting with Vladimir Putin, how do you think he's interpreting this, Vladimir Putin? Robin?
Well, look, I think this is a man who has probably studied Donald Trump very closely, and he has seen the dithering back and forth about whether Trump knows him, whether they've actually met before. I think he's likely to play a lot of shrewd games with President Trump. You know, if I were a betting woman, I'd say he's going to have Trump for lunch. This is where the two men are just have such different backgrounds, and they have such profound differences that I think the whole idea of America first and Russia first, it's going to be very hard to find common ground that they can agree on.
Yeah, I've got to say that's one of the advantages of a relatively short meeting, that it'll be harder for President Putin to actually consume President Trump in a briefer period. You know, because I think we're all concerned about precisely that Putin is going to raise issues of Syria or other things and get Trump to commit in ways that befuddle the U.S., just as happened with the Lavrov meeting, where President Trump revealed intelligence about Syria, or the meeting with Xi Jinping, where he suddenly sort of relied on China to be the pillar of U.S. policy toward North Korea.
Do you think that President Trump realizes who he's dealing with, or does he think that he can go in as a, you know, new president, former real estate mogul, and somehow schmooze Putin or understand what's happening in that room in that short amount of time?
President Trump has a remarkable ability to be blithe about these responsibilities, and I mean, he's been that way all along. He's been reluctant to consume the president's daily brief, to have major meetings about things. I think what troubled me a little bit this time was that H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, who's somebody who I really do admire, I think is a real grown-up in the White House, that he seemed to defer to that and suggested that President Trump didn't really have an agenda going into the Putin meeting because, you know, look, Putin is going to have an agenda.
Yeah. Robin, I'm going to put up this poll because this is a PBS NPR Marist College poll, and it shows 54% of Americans think Trump's dealings with Russia were unethical or illegal. If you're the president or someone advising the president, don't you look at those numbers, at that number, and think that you have to confront Putin about it, even if it's a short meeting, as you said?
Well, I think it will be brought up, but I think it will probably be in some nuanced way rather than a confrontation saying, as President Obama did, cut it out, that there will be an effort to diplomatically or kind of slide around it but make sure that it's part of the discussion. It's going to be a very tricky part of the conversation. Remember, you've got so many big subjects that the world is depending on. President Trump faces his first real crisis with the North Korean missile challenge, the intercontinental missile, and he needs Russian cooperation to impose new sanctions. They have some big things that have to happen, even if it's only to agree to have their foreign ministers, engage in the details of some kind of future talks on these issues. They have a lot of substance, and so trying to figure out a way to talk about something like hacking, like the relationship between the two men, is going to be very tricky, I think.
I want to know, Robin, what your National Security Council friends or allies may be telling you about this meeting, because in this meeting we know President Trump is in the room. It's going to be 6 people. It's going to be Trump, Putin, Tillerson, along with 2 translators. And Putin has met with, and Lavrov as well. He's met with, for 17 years now, 4 American presidents. What are they sharing with you, if anything?
Well, the senior aides at the White House were very concerned about having a meeting where President Trump and President Putin were in a room alone. There were echoes of 1986 when President Reagan met President Gorbachev, and there were great hopes that there would be some kind of progress on disarmament. And what happened was there was a real breakdown over the issue of Star Wars. And there was fear that that could happen again, particularly given the fact that at that point President Reagan was deep into his presidency. At this point, President Trump is not. And so the deal was we'll make it a little bit longer meeting. We'll have President Trump will have Secretary of State Tillerson with him. That will give him someone, another adult or unadult in the room to kind of monitor the nature of the discussions and make sure that it doesn't go too much off track. But I think there's deep fear that this president is not ready for prime time with the president of Russia.
Yeah. Before we go to Nick Kristof, I want to ask you about the intercontinental ballistic missile test that North Korea conducted on the 4th of July, by the way. Today, South Korean President Moon Jae-in said that under the right circumstances, he'd be willing to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. What's your reaction?
I think that, look, fundamentally, we don't have a workable policy toward North Korea, and our strategy has been to get North Korea to give up its nuclear arsenal. I think it's increasingly clear that simply is not going to happen. And on the one hand, President Trump doesn't have a viable strategy. On the other hand, look, President Obama didn't have a strategy that worked either. Neither did President Bush. I think that among North Korea watchers whom I respect, pretty much everybody agrees that the last best hope, and it might not succeed, is some kind of a deal involving a freeze of North Korea's nuclear arsenal and missile tests in exchange for some reduction in U.S. military exercises. And that's going to only come about, if it can come about, through talks and discussions involving the U.S. and very much involving President Moon of South Korea.
Nick, Robin, thank you very much. When we come back, President Trump bashing the U.S. press while in Poland, a country that's recently had a crackdown on its own press. How presidential is that?